Have you ever visited the r/Trailmakers subreddit and seen these posts about these massive, super maneuverable, Dorito-looking jets that claim to have 0 gyros, 0 glitches, and yet they are still absolutely destroying your glitch creations? How is this possible? Well, a lot of people in the comments would say that the flap angles are simply extremely high, or that they are using gyros and are lying, or that they are using glitches and are lying. However, this is just straight up not true. And I'll show you exactly how. So, this is Comet on legit performance dogfighters. So, there are 3 concepts that you need to understand about a legit performance dogfighter, or LPD as we tend to call them. These concepts are intentional instability, connections, and thrust to weight ratio. I will explain all of these. So, intentional instability is decreasing the stability on either the pitch axis or the yaw axis of your aircraft to allow it to rotate easier and gain more maneuverability. The idea of connections is making sure that every block is as connected to its neighboring blocks as possible. This is useful for durability. And thrust to weight ratio is useful for keeping your plane quick in the sky. It is your kilograms of thrust compared to your kilograms of weight. The higher, the better. This on screen is the formula for it if you ever want to calculate it, but you don't need to. So, here's what those concepts look like in action. I made a small testbed aircraft. This demonstrates many of the concepts. So, as you see currently, this aircraft is quite stable. Our center of drag here, the center of vertical drag, as the game calls it, is quite far behind the center of mass. And in terms of our connections on the wings, even though we have these leading edges, they are not connected to anything. So, if this block is gone, your whole wing goes. And now, your entire wing is gone. And then, you can see that in terms of thrust, we have many space thrusters in here. However, only one is actually active on top of the large propeller. So this gives us a low thrust to weight plane. This plane is a demonstration of a low thrust to weight, high stability, low connection aircraft. This is a lot of what you tend to find in public lobbies and are what most people are flying. So, let's see how it flies. You can see we do not pick up speed very quickly. We are quite slow in the air, and our pitch is not very good. This is maximum pitch. This is not the maneuverability that we want, and would be very inconvenient to have in a dogfight when you're trying to get your nose on somebody. So, let's make a couple modifications. Now, we are going to reduce stability, add connections, and increase our thrust to weight ratio. In terms of stability, we can remove these. Watch our center of drag move. It's now further up this way. Let's increase our thrust to weight ratio. And then we can add some connections. By doing this, now if the root of the wing is gone, we still have this section of the wing left. We have increased our durability by increasing the connections that we have on our aircraft. So now, let's fly this. We are much quicker, and you can see that our pitch is significantly better. We are a lot faster in the air, and if the root of the wing is taken out, then we do not have nearly as big of a problem, because we still have 2/3 of our wing intact instead of 0/3 of our wing intact. So now, what if we take this to the extreme? When you take these concepts further, you get a plane such as this. This is my general public lobby aircraft. As you can see, it has a lot more power cores. It has 118. What does this look like? You're fast off the ground, and watch the maneuverability. We can now spin in place. That is also helped in part by our thrust vectoring at the back of the plane, as you can see. That gives us some extra low speed maneuverability, and if you look closer into the internals of this plane, you can see that these blocks all have connections on the inside and outside by as many blocks as possible. Every single one of these is a 1x2. There is a common misconception in the Trailmaker community that smaller blocks have significantly less health. This is not true. Only the very largest blocks actually have an increase in health. And building your planes out of smaller blocks and making sure that every block is as connected to other blocks as possible will make your plane survive more hits and lets it get, as I call, Swiss cheesed, like you can see here with some of my planes. So how do we actually build one of these? Well, there are a couple different methods. However, I will be going through my thought process and what I am doing to make one of these glorious aircraft. I tend to start with what we call the core. These are where our primary thrusters are, and where everything is centered around. Now, we need to decide, like, how big should our core be? I will go with a thinner core design that has 3 thrusters in the middle, and 2 on the outskirts. This is what I typically do for a thruster stack, as I call it. I will place these blocks like this. Reason for that is because then we take this entire build, as you can see here, and we copy and paste it. This is making the core of our aircraft. And now you can see that basically nothing is connected. I'm going to remove these thrusters so we can add thrust vectoring later. It is quite essential. Then I will just make sure that everything gets connected by using these rounded 1x2s. So now we have this. Everything is connected. However, for those of you who are more observant, you may have noticed that I didn't use the wedge 1x2s, even though they might look cooler. That is because of the second concept, connections. These blocks do not have connections on the side. However, the rounded blocks do. So, that is increasing our connections, increasing our durability by doing this. And now, once we have this, I tend to make the thrust vectoring, which this is when you tilt a group of thrusters up or down to allow you to have either greater pitch or greater roll through thrust instead of aerodynamic deflection. So, I will put some hinges in, and then I will go for a more simplified design. Tend to do a thruster layout first, and then you build around that thruster layout. So, I am adding in the connections right now. Okay. And now we can build the outer shell. I'm going to put 1x4s on the top for more connections where we need it. And then I am going to use this flat windshield block on the sides, like this. And then, on the bottom, we aren't going to have any connections anyway, so we can simply fill that space in. Okay. So now, we can make sure that these blocks will not connect to anything else in our build, because they're going to be on hinges, and if you connect anything to it, then it's going to rotate half of your plane, and that's very inconvenient. You can use pretty much any of these, it doesn't exactly matter. All that matters is that there are no connections on this side. As you can see, if I place a block in here, the only connection, which is this little green square, is to this block. So, despite being right next to each other, this AND gate and this 1x2 are completely separate. So, you can place these all around. But then we have these gaps. Well, we can use some building techniques with tail lights, like this. And we can use these to fill in these gaps, just like that. So now we have our thrust vectoring in place and ready to be used. Now, I'm going to build out the wing shape and cockpit. I'm going to use a relatively simple wing shape for this build. And this is the wing shape that I'm going to use. It's a very common style, and it will work well for this demonstration. So, now I'm going to build out the cockpit. There are many different ways of doing this. However, I will simply build my normal cockpit. Going to place a flat windshield. This is because this will be the bottom of our aircraft that will extend from the front all the way to the back. We're going to have a frame rail running directly down the middle. And then, I'm going to place my seat. I'm going to put it right there. The reason for this is because most of the fire on your aircraft is either going to be coming from this direction or this direction. So, we want to protect our cockpit from this angle as much as we can, and this configuration allows us to do that. A lot of people in public lobbies tend to add rockets to their builds, but they put them under the wings, and then whenever they try to fire them, they shoot themselves and they blow themselves up. So, we put our rocket launcher in the cockpit, so that even though, yes, there are blocks in front, the game doesn't exactly care about that until you get to a certain distance, which this is well within the not able to get shot range. So, we are perfectly safe from getting shot by our own rocket. And then, I'm going to build out our next support. Here, I'm using this staggered pattern because it actually gives you more connections. So now, we have what I like to call the airframe. This is where we have our cockpit, we have our main thrusters, and we have our thrust vectoring. And now, we can build off of this. So, I'm going to place in our guns, because they do weigh a significant amount. In the LPD world, 6 blasters is quite typical. This is the most commonly accepted loadout. And there we go. So now, let's start by giving our core a bit more durability. How I'm going to do this is I'm going to place frame rails along the sides here, these are going to be the main connections between our wings and the rest of our build. And we can use these rounded 1x2s to connect it on the top and on the bottom. If I want to, I can stagger this to, again, give us even more connections and increase our durability further. Looks much nicer now, doesn't it? We can start filling in our wings and our neck area. Around the center of mass, I tend to start by putting a couple elevator fins. Then I can add a couple for pitch further back. I'm actually going to move this up to there so that we can add a little bit of lift. In terms of lift, you can either use modular wings or the spoilers. But flip them upside down. These actually do create lift. And fill in the wing shoulder area, as I call it. And then, for the rest of this wing, I'm going to make sure that I have plenty of connections along this point. I'm actually going to put a flap wing in here so that we get a little bit of extra lift and another control surface. Now I am once again staggering the blocks, just like that. And now, from this point, you can basically fill in with whatever, like, for example, I'm putting a 2x4 here, because it's a place where we can reduce complexity, as our wingtips will not be hit very often, and we can concentrate that armor to the core, cockpit, and root of the wing. So now, we can fill in this section. I am going to add one set of elevator fins up here, simply for redundancy's sake, where if one of these is taken out, we aren't actually losing very much pitch authority, because we still have these ones up at the front. And now, once we add in the yaw controls, we will have what is effectively a finished, but unarmored and unpainted plane. So, how do we go about adding yaw? Well, there are generally two ways you can do it. You can either do it with integrated ailerons and flaps, as I call it, where they are effectively invisible in the design, and they are not meant to be seen. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to make space for our ailerons right here by flipping the locations of these. And then, that is the wrong aileron. I am going to place ailerons on the bottom. We can check our yaw. It's still a little bit unstable, so place some extra on the top. You can see that our forces are unstable, and they're actually maybe too unstable in this case. You can see that they are in front of the center of mass. That's going to make our plane want to rotate a lot, and is going to make for a difficult to fly airframe. So, if you are following along with this and making your own, I would find a way to reduce that. And place a U bracket there. The reason for this is because we don't want a lot of force pushing down on the front of our aircraft. These planes tend to pitch down a lot, and the deflection of aerodynamic pieces actually does matter. So that is the difference between doing this, and doing this if it were connected. This would make our plane pitch up more. This is neutral, and this would make our plane pitch down. That is why I have set these to be neutral. Now, we can start doing some flight tests. But these are bound to A and D, and our roll is bound to S and W. So how do you do this? So, I select every single elevator fin. I max out the speed. I'm not going to touch the angle just yet. And then for the roll, I'm going to set one side to A and D, and the other side to D and A. This means that when we press A or D, one side will go up, pushing one side of our plane down, and the other side will go down, pushing the side of our plane up. This will give us a rolling effect, and we'll let our plane maneuver. Think of the steering on a forklift, right? If we want the plane to turn to the right, we need the back of the plane to go to the left, which means we need a force pushing it to the left, and that means that our ailerons need to go right. That is the red arrow on top. We can set these to E and Q. E is the red one, and that's the one that will make our plane go to the right. I am also going to max out the speed and set the angle to somewhere between 20 and 30 degrees. I'm going to go with 30 degrees because I am a Giga Chad. However, on the bottom, these arrows are going to be flipped. So, I'm going to use E on the green arrow and Q on the red arrow, like so. So now, we can move on to getting the basic keybinds for our thrust vectoring. We can lift up this section, and for some basic settings, you can set the speed to anywhere between 0.5 and 2. Most people tend to max it out. However, I often keep it normal. You can do whatever you want with that. Set the steering help all the way down, and set the angle somewhere between 30 and 45 degrees. I will set it to 45 for this. You can go above to 60. However, I would not recommend it unless you really need the extra low speed maneuverability. However, from mirror mode, you can see that one side has the green arrow up and one side has the red arrow up. This will become very useful later in the logic section. However, just set S to whatever arrow will make it go up. So, this one, the red arrow will make it go up. I'll set that one to S and the other one to W. And it will be the opposite here. So green will be S, red will be W. So now, put that back down. And if we exit build mode, we should see we have our roll control. This is pressing D. And our right side is going to go down. Our left side is going to go up. That is exactly what we want. And if I press the opposite, it will make us do the opposite. So our roll is in working condition. Our pitch also appears to be. However, you may notice that our pitch has one problem. It seems to be all well and good at the back. Our thrust vectoring is working great, and our pitch is working great as well. But at the front, when I press S, this is making the front go down. There are a couple different ways you can flip this. You can either flip the speed, or you can flip the keybinds. I tend to flip the keybinds, but whatever you'd like to do. So, everything about our airframe is in good working order. Let's check if it can fly. So, our plane is pitching down a lot. I am not pressing anything. So, we need more up force somewhere. However, our roll feels good, And our yaw is feeling good enough for now. That's actually really powerful yaw. The way that I'm going to attempt to do this is replacing these U brackets with upwards facing wedges. It may look a little silly, however, we can simply turn them to glass, and then no more problem. And another thing that I'm also going to do is this flat windshield on its corners, this is also generating downforce. So I'm going to swap it out for 2 wedge 4x1s and L brackets on the corners. These are neutral, so we have eliminated 2 aerodynamic arrows that would make us pitch downwards. So, let's see how it flies now. Now, our plane actually has a little bit of a natural pitch up. That is quite helpful in some scenarios. But, as you can see, this plane is significantly more flyable now. So now, we can start getting into some of the intricacies. The thing that I will start with for this section is logic. There are only 3 necessary logic blocks to make everything you need in one of these planes. And that is 2 mechanisms. The roll thrust vectoring, make each of these go in different directions, just like a roll does, and use what is known as differential thrust. This is where on the internal thrust of your aircraft, you turn off or turn on one side selectively to give your plane more yaw power and to give your plane more yaw at low speeds. That is what this is for. So, I'm going to put this behind the cockpit and buried in here, as this logic can be very vulnerable and we don't want it getting shot out. This area is very likely to stay intact for the duration of a fight, so we can put logic up here and it will work just fine. So, for our roll vectoring, I'm going to use a singular OR gate. Then, I'm going to set it to A and D, and assign it to our large hinges at the back for our thrust vectoring. Then, I just check what happens. This is inverted. I am pressing A, and this would make our plane go to the right. The reason this works is because, as we did earlier, we did not set the large hinges to be the same. And since this is inverted, I'm just going to flip the keybinds. And now, we have roll vectoring. Look at that. And now, this is the one slightly more complicated section. I will do it on the external of the plane to make it easier to see. So, for this, you will need 2 blocks. An AND gate and a NOR gate. On the NOR gate, set the controls to Q and E, and let it activate our AND gate. Our AND gate be set to space on the positive side. And then, what we are going to do with this AND gate is we are going to select every single thruster that we want to vector. So for me, this is everything in the main 2 thruster pods, but not our thrust vectoring, because we want thrust vectoring at all speeds at all times. So, select every single space thruster. Just like that. And now, it seems like this will do nothing. But now, I'm going to pull out just the space thrusters that I selected on the AND gate. I am going to set this side, the right side, to Q, and the left side to E. The reason for this is simply because of how this works. What this system does is it says that if you are not pressing Q and E and you are pressing space, activate these thrusters. However, if you are pressing Q and E and pressing space, then do not deliver thrust to every thruster, only use the default keybinds. And we can bury this logic further in. Just like so. I'm going to color code these. And then fill in this space and cover it up. So now, if we test our logic, you can see from some of the particles that when I press E, the left side is firing, and when I press Q, the right side is firing. When this happens in the air, it gives you an incredibly powerful yawing effect that lets you have extreme maneuverability, and it lets you basically become a frisbee. Really, all we have left is fine-tuning, armor, and, of course, a paint job. So, I noticed that our plane is pitching up a lot, so I'm gonna try to replace these U-brackets just like that. And does it fly straight now? Yes. Okay. That is part of the fine-tuning process. Is tuning the aerodynamics of your plane to fly straighter. This area, you can see that we are getting up there on complexity. But now, with that, our airframe is looking significantly more complete. Looking like a product now. How the heck do we armor our wings? If we just put panel blocks over it, it adds a lot of unnecessary aerodynamics to our plane. And also, we are reducing the aerodynamic efficiency of these blocks to almost 0. You can see how far ahead our forces are now when I take them away. They're balanced again. So, what do? Well, you can go into the decoration block section. A vast majority of these blocks will have 0 aerodynamic properties. They absolutely do not care. We can cover our wings in these. Doesn't particularly matter how you do it. But since we have the extra complexity to spare, we can do it top and bottom just like that. Now our wings can take a couple extra hits. Oh. See that? That's a problem. So, this is a thing in the game known as weld groups, where essentially the game groups together pieces in order to make the physics calculations easier on the game engine, which is Unity, of course. So, what we do is we kind of just start moving around random stuff until it works. Oh, and as you can see right there, I've replaced that block, and our blocks are no longer floating into the air magically. So now, this is essentially a completed, legit performance airframe. It flies straight, it is quite quick, it has plenty of guns, we have our rocket, our weld groups are intact, and I would call this an airframe. I am going to be posting this on the Steam Workshop with a paint job, and you can try it for yourself. You can investigate if anything from this video was confusing. I will be checking the comments for any questions that anybody has about these planes. But other than that, here's some combat footage. I commend you if you actually made it to the end of this video, but if you did, seriously, massive thank you to you. Thank you so much for watching all the way through and watching my incoherent ramblings about how these planes work. So, once again, thank you so much for watching, and if you're still watching, leave